the biggest challenge is social and organizational, because going international involves practically every team in the company.
Hello and welcome to the Multilingual Content Podcast, where experts discuss international content management, translation, and global communication.
I'm Caterina from Anderto, and today our founder, Nicola Calabrese, had an amazing chat with Fred Fischer, an internationalization consultant who has worked with several companies to help them expand their global reach. Fred is an expert in the field of the software internationalization and localization. He's here to share his insights on the key aspects of this process. We will dive into the difference between internationalization and localization, the technical and organizational challenges involved, and the tools and technologies that can streamline these efforts. Fred has a wealth of experience in this domain, and we are excited to learn from his experience. Please join me in welcoming Fred to the show.
Hello, Fred, and welcome to the Multilingual Content Podcast. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm good. And today we're going to talk about a topic that I know is very close and dear to your heart, is software internationalization and software localization. But before we jump into today's topic, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself?
My name's Fred Fischer. I'm an internationalization consultant. I've worked with several companies helping them to go international, and I live in London.
When you say internationalization, would you mind explaining a little bit the distinction between internationalization and localization in software development?
So the difference is basically localization means translating the software, and internationalization makes it possible to translate the software.
Can you give a little bit of an example there? For example, what is you translate let's say the text in localization, but what do you do with internationalization, for example?
So that's right. With localization, you need to translate the text, and you also need to be careful to see if there's any text in images somewhere that's harder to translate. And you also need to localize other things, for example, prices are in different formats in different countries. Addresses can be really complicated, and also date formatting. And one of the really big pain points is time zones.
Yeah, because for example, the structure of the address is different. In the US, you might have a space specifically for the different states within the United States, while you might not need that, let's say in Germany, or maybe you need a different thing, a different kind of fields that you got there. So what steps are involved in the initial localization of a software product?
So the main thing you need to do is to remove any hard-coded text from the software code and replace the hard-coded text with special variables that display text in the user's language. These variables are called translatable string keys. And the process of replacing hard-coded text with translatable string keys is called string extraction. This is usually the most time-consuming thing that you need to do to make it possible to translate the software. And it's mostly straightforward, but parts of it can be surprisingly complicated, and this can lead to unexpected delays. So, before you start, it's a really good idea to have somebody audit the code to get a better idea about how long things will take. Then, once you've extracted the strings, you need to upload the text into something called a translation management system so the translators can translate the text. Then, you need to have a process for including the translated text in the software so that users will be able to see the text in their own language.
How significant is encoding in character set in internationalization and localization?
If you only want to translate the software into European languages, then you don't really need to think about text encoding, because every kind of text encoding supports the characters that are used in European languages. But when you want to translate the software into non-European languages, then you need to use a kind of text encoding called Unicode. And you need to make sure that Unicode is supported across all of the software, not just the user interface, but also all of your back-end systems like databases and search engines need to support Unicode as well. And you need to check that nothing breaks when you start putting Unicode text into those systems.
What challenges are typically faced during internationalization and localization implementation?
Sometimes you find you need to make changes to the user interface code. For example, sometimes the layout breaks when you translate the text. For example, because German is about 30% longer than English, so when you translate to German, it can break the layout. And also, Chinese is much shorter than English, so you might need to increase the font size when it's in Chinese, otherwise it won't look very good. But I'd say probably the biggest challenge is not a technical challenge. The biggest challenge is social and organizational, because going international involves practically every team in the company. Everyone needs to work together and everyone needs to do some extra tasks. So it's really important to get buy-in and to ensure that everyone really understands the value of the project to the company, and also how the project will help each individual team with their core work. For example, with the PR team, now they've got to do a whole bunch of extra work every time they release a new publicity project. They've got to allocate a whole load of extra time for all of their work to be translated. So that's a lot of extra stuff to do, and it's a lot of extra complication and hassle. But as a result, now millions more people can enjoy the things that they've written in their own language.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's actually quite empowering, I would say.
Absolutely.
And when we're talking about specifically software localization, so you have your app, you have it now available in different languages. Is that it? You don't have to touch it anymore? You don't have to do any, or is it like, I mean, it's a rhetorical question. I know it's a rhetorical question. So what about continuous localization? Does it differ from the initial localization? What it consists of?
I mean, yeah, for sure. The initial task of localizing the app is a really big job, but that's not the end of it by any means. Once you've done the initial work to enable the software to be translated, now you need to ensure that when you build new features, that you'll be able to translate the new features as well. And that means you need to adapt your product development process a bit. Basically, when you're planning to build a new feature, you need to add the new text and the design wireframes to a translation management system, so the translators can translate the text at the same time as the developers are writing the code. And that means that the translations will be ready at the same time as the code will be ready, so you can release the feature without having any delays waiting for it to be translated.
I have another question about the managing all this, the localization and all the strings. Like what tools and technology are commonly used for internationalization and localization tasks?
The main new software system that you need is something called a translation management system, or TMS for short. Translators use the TMS to translate the software into other languages. The key thing that the TMS does is to provide the translators with context about how the words are used in the software, because the same words can mean very different things in different contexts. The TMS also makes it easier for translators to review each other's work, so you get quality control. It also streamlines project management, and it increases productivity. For example, by suggesting AI translations, which are usually not right the first time, but it can sometimes save time and be a helpful starting point for the translators to do their work.
And what about the, let's say, developer side of things? Because with TMS and connections, what roles they might play with the streamlining the, as you said, like product management as well?
As engineers as well, the main software system that you need to work with is also the translation management system. You need to create some kind of a workflow to get the text into the TMS, and you need to create some kind of a workflow to get the translated text into the software. There's various ways you can do that. For example, sometimes you can make an integration between the code repo and the TMS, but there's no one-size-fits-all solution to this. You just got to look at the individual situation and see how that's working.
Oh, I see. Okay. I know when you have a translation management system, the fact that you can connect it, for example, with GitHub, that somehow helps obviously streamline having the strings synchronized with the database, like the translation synchronized with the database on GitHub. How does that work? If you can explain a little bit that, because it's useful compared, for example, to having like an Excel spreadsheet that then somehow you have to put back, let's say, into the database.
On the development side, there's no special software that kind of magically does the internationalization process for you. It's more a case of there's a different approach depending on what software you're using, although certainly there's a lot of common patterns. There is also software out there that will detect if some common mistakes have been made in internationalization, but mostly you'll be building custom code of some kind.
And what about languages that are right to left, like Arabic or Hebrew? What challenges are typically faced when localizing software into these languages and how they can be addressed?
So when you're working with right to left languages, first of all, you've got the issue that you have with any non-European languages, which is you've got to make sure that Unicode is supported across the whole of the software. But you've got another challenge, which is it's not just the words that are going right to left. If you are used to reading things from right to left, then the way your eyes move across a website is completely different from if you are used to reading from left to right. And that means that where you instinctively look on the page for a menu button, for example, is the opposite of what it is if you're used to reading left to right. So as a result, if you really want to make a truly localized experience for your users who are speaking Arabic or Hebrew, then you need to make your whole user interface into a mirror image of what the user interface looks like when it's for people who are reading left to right. And this is a very big job typically, and there's not a one-size-fits-all solution to this. You just need to look at how the user interface works at the moment, and then you have to make it adaptable so that everything can be a mirror image of itself. It's a little bit like making a website that adapts so that it looks differently depending on if you're on a computer versus a mobile phone. But you might need to do something a little bit deeper as well.
So yeah, it's again, I guess is a lot of collaboration with the design team as well. As you said before, like everybody working together, it touches a little bit of every department, and that could be a good example, yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. It really pays to work closely with the design team so that they can make a design that is easy to make a mirror image of, for one thing, and will involve the engineers quite heavily.
Okay. So thank you so much for these insights.
Sure thing.
Thanks for joining us today. The Multilingual Content Podcast is powered by Undertow. We help companies translate their content into results. Get in touch if you want to know more. And if you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any new episode. See you next time.